Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're excited to welcome author Elizabeth Harlan on the show. She's got a new book out, and it's a young adult novel. It's called Becoming Carly Klein, and we're excited to chat with her. Go to our website, elizabethharlan.com. It is linked in the episode notes. And Becoming Carly Klein is a coming of age story, and it really kind of deals with relationships. And boy, there's a lot of complexities in this story. And I think it's really cool for the young teens to have this as a way to identify with themselves as they go through different layers of growing up and having those relationships. And sometimes we do things that we're not supposed to, right, Elizabeth? Welcome. How are you?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you, Lisa. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's great to have you on here. I love it. We really get excited about young adult novels because I think, it's such a time where sometimes you feel alone growing up at that age, during that age.
I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely. And I think one of the ways in which teenagers and young people feel closer and feel more comforted is through reading. I know that was the case for me.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're dealing at, the 16s, that's when we start exploring, and that's when we get our feet into hot water. And I think what's great is that you're also teaching that we learn from these, from hot water,
Absolutely. That's very key. And that basically one of the experiences that I think my novel will provide for young people is that you can get into that hot water. You can go through, and you will go through a lot of challenges and a lot of very daunting situations, but that doesn't have to be construed as failure. That can be a growing opportunity for you. And that's what I've tried to build into my novel about Carly, who certainly gets into more than her fair share of difficulties.
Well, that's how we learn and grow and become adults. And as adults, we still do it, right? So in a way, I think we should look at this as being a novel for all ages.
Well, that's been one of the gratifying things about my readership. It seems to be somewhat of a crossover novel, which many young adult novels are these days. And I've gotten just as much really positive and excited response from the grown-ups who have read the book as I have from the young people.
What led you to write young adult novels?
It's a wonderful question. I've been asked it a lot in interviews, and I've obviously spent some time on it. I think that for me, I've not only written young adult, I've also written one adult biography, a literary biography. But with my young adult novels, I think that it's because the period of my life that I felt most alive, the period of my life in which I felt the most, in some ways, the most challenged and the most intense about learning and growing and taking in new things, where there was a freshness to the experience. There was, young people aren't jaded yet. They haven't had too much worldly experience, so that experiences they do have feel new and fresh. I think that that's never really left me in connection with those years. And when I've set out to write, I've very often connected with stories that land in that age group. It's not so much that I planned it, it's that that's what really happens. I write family stories, and there are other individuals in my families. Obviously, there are grown-ups, there are parents, and there are, teachers and a variety of people who are all ages. But the person that I've always focused on in my novel writing has been the young person coming of age. That's the specific category that really rivets my attention and makes my writing, I feel, come alive.
I love that you've done like the biography on George Sand, and then here we're doing young adult novels, and this is the third one, right?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, it's the trifecta. What I would think would be good for the audience is if you give everyone kind of a little preview of who Carly is and what it's like to become Carly Klein.
Great. Thank you for asking. Well, the story is about a young girl who's in high school who lives in New York City. It takes place in the 80s and the early 90s. And she's an unhappy girl. She's a girl who's struggling. She's a girl who does not feel at home in her school. She doesn't have a lot of friends at her school. She doesn't feel that her parents are paying the kind of attention to her that she wants and that she feels she needs. And one of the things the major thing that she devises as a way of kind of working herself out of this impasse is to to kind of sneak peeks at her mother's patients who come to therapy sessions in their home. A lot of therapists in New York City practice out of their apartments, and sometimes they have a sort of a special area or a special part of the apartment, and the patients come and go, and they don't necessarily combine with family members, but it's sometimes hard to avoid them and hard not to be seen by them because of the nature of the layout. And so Carly sees her mother's patients coming and going and becomes particularly riveted on a young man who is a blind junior at Columbia College in New York City. And she knows this. Not only does she see him, but when her mother's away from home, Carly peeks at her session notebooks, and she knows the backstory of Daniel, this particular student and patient. She knows his backstory, and she knows he goes to Columbia, and she knows how old he is. She knows he majors in music. She knows that he's blind. He happens to come to the sessions with his seeing eye dog, or service dog, as we call it now, but in that generation, we called it seeing eye dog. And one day she decides, after the session he has with her mother, to follow Daniel up to the Columbia campus. So she gets on a bus, she follows him. He can't see her, he's blind, so he can't recognize her from having passed her in the hall. And when she gets to Columbia, walking behind him and his service dog, he posts a message on a bulletin board on campus for a reader, which is what many blind students do, so that they can have their research and their work read to them as they work their way through school. And Carly takes the message off the bulletin board, subsequently calls him, and sets up a false identity and tells him she's a sophomore at Barnard College, which is right across the street from Columbia College, and that she's an art major, and that she would love to read for him and take this job. He gives her the job, and it leads to a relationship. But this is all unbeknownst to her mother. And so there's a lot of kind of secrecy and clandestine operation going on, and her mother is left out of the awareness of what her daughter is doing, who her patient is seeing. But she's hearing about it from Daniel, who comes to sessions and talks about the new girlfriend, who instead of calling herself Carly, calls herself Serena. And of course, the mother, who's a therapist, has absolutely no idea who Serena is except for what Daniel reports. And so this goes on. And then, not to provide too many spoilers, but there are a lot of intrigues. There's a lot of complication. It's a difficult form of deceit that Carly perpetrates in order to work herself through a lot of problems. The novel follows her through these problems and to a point of resolution. Hopefully a very satisfying resolution for my readers, because I truly believe that a lot of kids pass through very difficult challenges and very daunting situations and come out on the other side with a very good result, with growth, development, and a kind of contentment that was not available before they went through all of that.
And a lot of times in that era too, kind of look at those were kind of the latchkey kid eras too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
She's very independent. Her parents don't know about her comings and goings. They're both professionally very preoccupied. And Carly has a tremendous amount of freedom. It's quite different from the kind of helicoptering that goes on in parenting today. Typically today you get very involved parents that are very connected with their children's lives and very invested in them. But when I was growing up, and when Carly grows up, it was quite different. The parents were very well-intentioned. These are not evil people, but they led very different kinds of lives, and they had very different relationships with their children.
Well, we also, I was around that era too. And, number one, the music was good. Anyway, but we had some very weird trends. Boy, did we have some weird trends. But when I look at that era, we didn't have things like cell phones and all of that. So it was a little different. I think now parents have to have this extra level of watching what's happening with my children on social media, that kind of thing.
That's very difficult.
But they're doing exactly what Carly's doing in a way, because people spy on each other through Facebook and Instagram and things like that. They do.
What a wonderful observation. Yes. I hadn't thought of this.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, people will break up with each other romantically, but make sure a friend is still a friend so that they can report and show. And it's it happens in the adult world. So why wouldn't it happen to young adults? You know, people do this
Absolutely.
weird cyber stalking, which is no different. And the when you look at even at as a metaphor, like, or just like a, you know, with him being, with Daniel being blind, it's the same thing as someone not seeing someone spy on them. It's stalking, no matter how you look at it. And
Absolutely.
but it's wanting connection, right? And that's a young girl's way of worming her way in to feel some kind of connection.
Absolutely. And also the
Yeah.
opportunity, which I think is probably behind some of the cyber stalking and the cyber, some of this behavior that goes on today with the internet, of trying on new possibilities, new identities. I remember as a young person myself, wishing myself into the personality of this girl that I envied at school, or into this personality that I saw in the news or in a movie, and wishing that I could be a different person, which I certainly have stopped doing at that level as I've grown up. And I think most adults would have had the same experience of outgrowing that tremendous desire to maybe transform yourself entirely into someone else. And I
Mm.
think that's part of being young, growing up, and finding yourself, that trying on of identity. And in this case, of kind of creating a fake identity in Carly's case, and trying to live out the consequences of being that other person. And in the process, possibly picking up some skills and some awareness and some experience that serve you. It's not all negative. Obviously, there's the problem of having been deceitful, and that's a very serious problem. But Carly comes out on the other side of it, I think, a much fuller person with a much better handle on herself, which is, the title kind of telegraphs the message that Carly becomes Carly Klein. She accepts herself at the end of my story because she learns who she is and what her own capacities are. And I think that that's an important message as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's also, when going through her learning who she is, there's also that stage of when you do start to connect with people. And I bring this up even for adults again, because young adult is still like, we, sometimes only learn things later in life, right? And
Absolutely.
that's why young adult books are good.
Yeah, thank you. I think some
They,
of them are wonderful. And I read, obviously as a writer, you should, and I do read your own genre. And I do. And there are many of them that I just love. And as I
yeah.
was up, I read, the interesting thing is when I was growing up, we didn't call them young adult. That genre didn't really come into existence until later. And so we read a lot of books that would be today classified as young adult, like Catcher in the Rye. And they weren't called young adult, but that was what I was very attracted to.
Yeah, I read everything, man. I got my hands, I did a lot of historical fiction because you were learning life stories through
I
them.
love historical. My
I
present
did.
novel that I'm working on is historical fiction. It will be
Oh,
my,
cool.
but yes, I love the genre.
It is. It's that I was just in there when that when I was growing up, there really wasn't very many young adult novels like that are contemporary, So it just, and then it was kind of weird going from historical novels where I thought I knew what I was reading, and then had to reread later. So, if I read,
Absolutely.
yeah, I was reading, War and Peace at 13 years old is different than when
Wow.
you're 21.
I think
Just,
that's absolutely the case. There are authors I've gone back to, and in rereading them, I'm reading a whole different book than I read the first time through.
yeah. And with young adult novels, it is about finding those relationships. And where I was going to on that too is learning who you are and not pretending to be somebody you're not. And that happens in relationships all the time, where you'll
Mhm.
pretend to like football.
Very
How many
true.
women do that? Or I'll pretend to like this music, or pretend to like shopping when you don't. And it creates a very odd dynamic where you're now not being yourself, and it's not good for the other person either. So
No,
you're kind of belittling yourself by not being who you are, and you're not giving a true person to the other person. You're not being truthful. So it's kind of this lie. And so they're engaging with someone they think they like. I don't know if you've ever seen the Seinfeld episode where Jerry Seinfeld dated Janine Garofalo, and they were so alike, they got all excited, and then they ended up going like, we can't even stand each other. So alike. So I think it's kind of similar.
I think there's a lot of similarity. I think that's very true. And I think there's another dimension that's important as well, which is that I think when you're growing up and you try on, you could call it lying, but you're trying on a possibility. You're telling the boy or the girl that you're attracted to or the friend that you like something that you actually don't really know if you like yet. And I think you're trying to find out kind of who you are and what you do gravitate toward, what you are attracted to, what you are made of. I don't think you know yet. And I remember trying on lots of identities and lots of interests. I dated one boy I remember who was reading his way through the library practically alphabetically because he said it was really important to read that way. And he wanted to just read all the entire of what his library contained. And I tried doing that. And that's not the way I read. The way I read is by specific interest. And then I get into another interest. And I find, oh, I actually am interested in anthropology because I adored reading Clan of the Cave Bear, for example. And I never knew I was interested in anthropology. And so
Yeah.
I don't think all of it is meant as a deceit. I think some of it is meant as an experiment that
Mhm.
who am I? And we really do not know until we live and try out possibilities and until
Do
we
you think we even know? I mean, even, because people reinvent themselves all the time as
absolutely
they grow. And if
that's
you don't, you're losing out, man. We're supposed to reinvent, I think.
I think so. And I also believe, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about my attracting to young adult writing and to young adult literature. I think we're never, well, it's not that I think we know we're never really finished. We're never really all grown up. We may be older, we may even be old, but we're still growing, hopefully. And I think most of us do. And so we're basically engaging in that process throughout our lives. And even if we don't do it quite as dramatically as a teenager might, I think when we see teenagers doing it, something comes alive inside of us, which is this potential, this possibility for worlds yet unexplored. And when we read the literature, the good literature that's produced in the young adult genre, I think we're really going through it a little bit ourselves all over again. And that's part of the excitement and the lure of these books.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and they're timeless. Just like what, you're setting yours in the 80s and early 90s. And, here it is. It's still timely,
Well, thank you for that. I've been
Yeah.
asked quite a few times why I did set it in the 80s. And a lot of that has to do with my age and my comfort level with the pre-electronic age. I'm comfortable now at a certain level. Obviously, we all have to be with the electronic age. I've come, in my own way, I've come of age and learned to deal with it. But I didn't grow up with it. And so I feel closer. All of my protagonists so far, and the one that I'm writing now in my new historical fiction, all of them are from the pre-electronic eras, because those are the eras that I identify most strongly with and that I think I can capture. I can capture the voice and the language and the experience in a way that I'm not convinced I could capture as effectively children that are coming of age in this electronic era, which is quite a different time than when I was raised and grew up.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think we had remote controls.
No, I don't think we did either. We did.
I'm trying to think back.
We got my first television when I was a teenager.
Mine was a little different. I didn't see much until I didn't. I grew up in Kenya and in South Africa, so
Oh,
TV.
really?
And
Oh,
when I got here, I was 19 and there was TV during the day. I'm like, I think we only had TV starting at like 3 in the afternoon. And they were like
that's
older soap operas.
fascinating.
They weren't that current. And
Uh,
it was shared by different languages. So like if it
oh,
was Thursday
wow.
afternoon, it was English. Friday
Mhm.
afternoon would be Dutch. Sunday would be Kosa, that kind of thing. And then there
Fascinating.
thing called Mnet, and it was like a little box. And I think it's basically where cable started to come into the country. And then you could have a little bit more for longer but when we got here, and I remember we flew in to Orlando and my uncle picked us up. We were living in Florida and well, we just got there the first night. And we wake up in the morning, we were in Port St. Lucie where we were. And we wake up and there's a TV on and I'm like, what do you mean there's a TV on? And then there was a talk
Yeah.
show. It was like kind of like a Jerry Springer one, but it was some guy, Richard something, or I don't know. And anyway, all these people were arguing on stage, and I was in complete shock at this
What an
country.
extraordinary experience.
I was horrified. You do not behave like that. You do not. Yeah, it was almost like we were living in the silent generation from where
Yes.
I was coming
Yeah.
from.
Well, that's an amazing story.
So, yeah, very interesting. So, yeah, it's when you think about, how we're raised, and everyone's a little different. So many people are addicted to their phones now, but creating fake personalities. And now AI, I'm wondering now what's going to happen to our youth with AI, if they're going to
Mm-hmm.
create
Mm-hmm.
their own look, it's still experimenting though, like you say, right? This is how I want.
Absolutely. Extension of the same instinct, if you will, with a new application, which is AI, which is absolutely fascinating. There's so much, people talk down certain forms of progress, and yet there's so much that's beneficial in these new technologies. I mean, now that I'm writing a historical YA, I'm finding that doing research is so enabled by AI. If I need information about something, obviously you have to check everything that you get through AI, and you may have to make sure that it's valid, but I'm able to touch, to grasp, to reach out and get information that in the past, when I did research, for example, for my biography of George Sand, I traveled all over the world to archives to get information that today would be, I could click a button on my computer. I mean this literally, and get it. And so, for a writer who wants to absorb information and enlarge the stories that I tell, it's fascinating and so enabling. I know it can be abused, but I'm not talking about the abuse of using AI. I'm talking about the enabling features of it. Really amazing.
Yeah. It's a tool. And
It's a
you have to sharpen your tools and be aware that if your hammer's getting, let's put it this way. If your knife is dull, it's not going to be a very good knife. It becomes a dangerous knife.
Exactly right.
So you have to be diligent with it. And it's fascinating. It's really just a giant super engine that knows how to go back and forth and do things. It is fascinating. We do a lot of shows on AI, and what it's done for the medical world is amazing. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
I know people are scared, but it's
Absolutely.
pretty amazing. Now, I do want to ask you this: when you were doing all your research on George Sand and having to travel around, don't you in a way prefer that, because didn't it connect you with him a little bit, or were you going to libraries?
You raised a very important point, and to your point, I just this week got back this weekend from 2 weeks in France, in Haute-Savoie, which is the eastern portion of France that lines Switzerland and Italy. And I did research for the novel that I'm now writing, which is set in Haute-Savoie in France during the German occupation of France in World War II. And that information that I gleaned in this 2-week research trip, it's not anything that I could have gotten through the computer. The sights, the sounds, the tastes, hearing stories from individuals that provided anecdotes. This is not what you get on a computer. This is what you get by being on location. And yes, that's invaluable for writing, but it can be obviously supplemented with other tools. We have a toolkit, and there are different tools in it, but I couldn't agree with you more that being on location and experiencing something firsthand and personally is an irreplaceable experience. Nothing can equal.
And then when you write, I haven't asked this question of an author for a while. When you write, do you listen to music? Do you have a way do you, like some people I know, go and get up at 4 a.m. and then we'll get out there and go to like a Starbucks or something and write in a cafe, or everybody's got a different way of writing. And some people are night owls with a little bit of, bourbon on the side. Everyone's different. So what is your way of writing?
I love your question. And it is so individual. I'm a writer that writes without any accompaniment. I like silence and I like quiet. I like to write at home. I write first thing in the morning, which for me can be as early as 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock, depending. But I do wake very early And my best writing time is in the silence of those early hours. And then depending on how well it goes, I might write for, 4 or 5 hours, or I might write for 2 hours or a half an hour if it's a really bad day. But basically, that's when I wake up with energy and I'm uncluttered by distractions. And it seems to me that's when my best writing comes. I might use the afternoon or a piece of the evening to edit what I've written. I love to reread myself, which I think authors tend to do a great deal of, as they should. And I love to kind of redline my writing or to move it around and to kind of expand it or change it. But the real writing, the real composing happens first thing in the morning when I'm alone and when I'm in total solitude and quiet. That's the environment I need for my writing, even though many writers love to write in cafes. I'm too distracted by what's happening all around me. I could
Yeah,
never,
there's
nor would I
gossip going
want to. I want to watch people when I'm in a cafe
on.
and I
Yeah,
want
that's
coffee and have my croissant or whatever. But, I might write an email. I might write a text in a cafe, but I would not be seriously applying myself to composing a chapter or anything like that.
yeah, there's too much good stuff going on.
I think so.
We're major people watchers, and
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. I'd be too just like, but some people need the noise to focus.
And some people
That's an
play
interesting,
music. Absolutely.
yes,
Music
Baroque
is
music.
not what I need. I need silence. In fact, I'd
Yeah,
like to say, and it sounds self-serving perhaps, but I'd like to think that my words are my music and I really want to hear them. I very often read myself out loud when I write. So I don't need any of that, but other people are benefited by it. And I think the process is as various as personality is. It differs.
I read articles and things as to proofread, and I do it in a British accent.
Wonderful.
That way you slow down. I hope that speaking of music, are you going to do a music playlist for Carly?
Well, that's a wonderful idea. I haven't even thought of it, and nobody has
Yeah.
suggested.
Well, you know why? Because we have it's like the 80s are coming back around again. We have this, you know how history repeats itself.
Oh my God.
Fashion comes back around. Bell bottoms will never go out of style.
Never,
Um,
apparently. I thought they
I'm
would,
not
but they didn't.
complaining.
They came
Yeah,
back.
but they do look better on, they do balance out the hips and the ankles and but if you did a music playlist, it would be pretty cool to look at the music that was going on through that time frame and with songs that go with her story. It would be super cool. I think it would be
Actually,
because
I did come up. It's when I was fantasizing about Carly being made into a TV series, which several people suggested would
yeah.
be a great idea because of a variety of reasons about the way the plot is constructed and so on. I did imagine it set to John Denver's I'm Sorry, which is a song that not everybody knows, which fits so perfectly with the mood of my novel. The words actually fit with the way Carly feels at the end about some of what she has done. And John Denver was one of my favorite. I couldn't get
Mhm.
enough of John Denver when I was a young person. So yes, I mean, I would love to think a little bit more broadly about the music, the playlists that would, really work with Carly. I think it's a wonderful way of getting inside of the book and getting inside of the character and the period that it's cast in.
Yeah, and John Denver was big back then, you
Very
know.
big.
Actually, it was the first song I ever sang in public was Annie's song.
Really? Are you
Hmm.
a singer?
Yeah, and that was my very first one. And
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think of it. I
Oh, it's a
swear I know
beautiful
every single
song.
one.
It's
I'm going to
it's
look it up because
Look it up
I
when
know every
when
John
you get a
Denver
chance,
song.
because
Yeah.
now that you know the book Carly a little bit, Becoming Carly Klein a little bit, you'll see why I feel. I think you'll see why I feel that the
Okay.
song is a wonderful theme for the book.
I'm going to go listen to it because I love, John Denver is a heck of a songwriter and his work for the environment and everything is
Yes,
big.
yes,
I was just
and
thinking of Calypso yesterday, actually. It was going through. Anyway, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Also, start me on music, it'll never end. But I love that idea because it would be so much fun for, the youth of today to also listen to those songs, which are being used and sampled in hip hop and rap. And those songs they're not going away.
they're
So
not.
I think it would be really, really cool to do. But wow, it has been so cool talking with you, Elizabeth. I'm so glad you joined
Likewise,
us. And
I
I want
do.
people to know This is our every second Wednesday we do these shows with Books Forward, and they are an awesome company that just connects us with the best of authors, and we've been doing shows with them since we started podcasting, but working with them when we were in print magazine way back when. So it's been over 20 years with them. So I think through they're 25 years old this year, and I think we've known them for all 25 years, and it's been magical. They're really nice. So today this is, we've got a 2-part series, really focusing on young adult stories and authors and the content with it, because it is National Family Month, and that's an important thing to think of. Just kind of, these holidays sometimes are goofy. Like I think it's National Devil Food Cake Day. I don't know, but that's not a bad thing. But what it does is it reminds us hey, it's Family Month. What am I doing as a family? How are my family members? Have I actually even bothered to check in on my siblings or my parents or my children, my cousins, So I think these things are great. And a novel can be a great gift, and it can also be a way to start a conversation about serious things that often...
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Because back in the day when we had latchkey kids, we did our own, we were independent and everything. But now with phones and everything and texting and all of that, the youth can just kind of disappear into a phone and not deal with things.
Very true.
So I think the novels and the, the young adult books are so crucial to start those conversations and, pass them on. And, I'd love to see young adult book clubs.
Yes, I've thought of that. I think it would be a wonderful opportunity for kids not only to read more, but also to share, the way many of the adults I know, myself included, belong to such clubs. And we love the experience. And it turns into a lot more than just reading books. It's a whole complete experience of a relationship with these other people that you're sharing what you're reading with.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, everyone. ElizabethHarlan.com is where to go, and you can learn more about her other young adult books and also her biography on George as well, because, we've talked about it, so go check it out. So just go check that out, the novelist George Sand. And, of course, the new one is Becoming Carly Klein. So thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Lisa. It was a pleasure talking with you.
You too. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.